So it looks to be about 6:31. Can everyone hear me okay? Just give me a thumbs up. Excellent, excellent. Good evening, everyone. My name is Angie Chesensky. I'm the Recovery Oriented Systems of Care Project Coordinator. Welcome to the ROSC panelist discussion about people of color's experience when they seek help for substance, dependency treatment, and/or behavioral health afflictions. Our panelists tonight will share their perspective in the capacity of law enforcement, clinician, spiritual guidance, person with lived experience, and leadership in the behavioral health sector. Now tonight, our objective is to bring awareness to the experience and come together as a community. So we really want to try to address any gaps in our human service infrastructure to address the needs of all of our citizens in McLean County seeking and receiving recovery and treatment services for their behavioral health and substance use afflictions. And before we get started, I'd like to recognize some key players in bringing this event together. Toy Beasley with TASK, Linda Foster, our local NAACP branch president, Dorothy Davis with Children's Home and Aid, myself, again with the ROSC, and also Dan Sokolsky, the recovery support specialist from the ROSC, who will also be moderating the discussion this evening. So throughout the discussion, if you come across or have any questions you may want to ask, please drop them in the chat box and we will do our due diligent effort to address all those questions at the end during the Q&A segment of our discussion. Now, before I turn it over to Dan, let me introduce to you our panelists. Tonight we have Gary Scott, the interim Bloomington Police Chief. Greg Scott, excuse me. Wendy Ashford, licensed clinical social worker. Danielle Beasley, another licensed clinical social worker. Natasha Nuno-Ponder, licensed clinical professional counselor. Ramon Pippins, our family support specialist. And Pastor William Bennett, senior pastor and spiritual advisor. So with that, please, Dan, go ahead and take it away.
Okay, thank you, Angie. I was going to read some bios for our participants. I think you kind of covered the high spots there. I'll say that you can find detailed bios for all the panelists at our McLean County ROSC Facebook site, which is basically McLean County ROSC. McLean County Recovers, excuse me, a ROSC community. So that's on Facebook, but I'll hit a few more high points. Interim Chief Scott has served over 20 years with the force. He's became an assistant chief in 2016. Prior to that, he was a lieutenant in the Criminal Investigations Division. Wendy Ashford's a licensed clinical social worker. She's certified alcohol and drug counselor with co-occurring substance use and mental health disorder professional as well. She's worked in behavioral health field for over 30 years. Natasha, I don't see here. I will go to Danielle Beasley, also a licensed clinical social worker with a master's degree in social work from Illinois State University. She has clinical experience working with individuals and families, helping them with a myriad of different areas, navigating trauma, grief, loss, anxiety, depression, self-harm, stress management, and much more. Pastor William Bennett has served as served as a senior pastor since January of 2007. That's my daughter's birthday, so I know that's 14 years, and is defined as a servant leader with a natural passion for developing people. He's an author of 5 books, which you can find on his website, and his goal is to bring the glory to God and reach as many souls for Christ as possible. He has been recognized and awarded from several community outreach programs. And finally, Ramon Pippins, CMHFA, is a family support specialist with the Family Community Resource Center in downtown Bloomington, works with community members, securing services for housing, behavioral health, and financial needs. helps citizens navigate DCFS's legal system to retain custodial rights of their children, and is dedicated to empowering himself to be a role model and to fellow McLean County citizens. So again, we thank everybody for your time. I want to also mention, if it wasn't already stated, we're going to go through some questions that we have prepared, and then towards the end, the last 20 minutes or so, we're going to allow our attendees to answer or ask any questions, offer any feedback, just kind of make it more of an open discussion. This is being presented as a webinar, so we won't be able to see our attendees, but you can use the Q&A feature on your Zoom panel. And there's two selections. You can either select to put a question to or chat to all attendees, or all attendees and participants, which would be the panelists as well. So that would probably be the best one to use. So hopefully we'll get some good dialogue and discussion at the end. Looks like Natasha Nunu Ponder has joined us. And real quick, Natasha is a licensed clinical professional counselor and certified alcohol and drug counselor. She's completed her undergrad degree at Illinois State University with a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology and Sociology, and obtained a Master's of Arts degree in clinical professional psychology. Her work experience in behavioral health includes chronic and pervasive mental illness, crisis, and addiction in the community. So thank you for jumping on, Natasha. All right, well, we'll go ahead and get started here. First, I want to kind of set the stage by talking to, we have a variety of lived experience from people coming at this more from a professional, clinical perspective, coming at it from a person with lived experience who has, dealt themselves with what it's like to go to treatment or to live a life, on a recovery path. And, we have panelists coming at it from a spiritual perspective as a faith leader, and as well as law enforcement. So, we're going to cover a variety of perspectives here. I just want to get a little bit of background on a couple of you. So one of the things that we want to bring awareness to is patterns of intergenerational addiction and mental health. So, how to break these patterns of deeply embedded issues of addiction and mental health from generation to generation over the course of decades or even centuries. Ramon, as a person with lived experience, I just was wondering if you could describe a little bit about your family dynamic, what it was like growing up.
Growing up, I had a mom and a stepdad. My stepdad worked construction, so pretty much he was gone from before sun, rose till sunset. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. She cooked a lot, she cleaned, made sure the kids were all looking presentable when we went out to school or to church. But when they were home, it was kind of like a tag team to make sure that, they grew up kind of old school. So we had certain rules that we had to apply by, doing chores, dishes, making up our bed, folding clothes, certain things like that. And I think that upbringing kind of helped a little bit later on in life when I did face some challenges to have some discipline to kind of stick through some challenging times. So, we can all sit there and say, our parents could have did this or did that, but parenting doesn't come with a book. So with both of my parents, they did the best that they could for what they were going through. And it's something that, again, it stayed with me and it still sticks with me to this day.
Thank you. Appreciate you keeping that succinct too, because that's probably a question we could have spoke an hour about. Pastor Bennett, how about yourself? A little bit about your family dynamics growing up.
Thank you. Grew up in a two-parent home. My father was a pastor. My mom had started the church in 1976. And just even with the question, I really had the opportunity to learn from them how to have generational thinking when it comes to your family dynamics, right? That what your children see your parents doing affects you as a child, and then you becoming an adult, and then it going on and on and on and on. So my father and mother taught me and my brother at an early age that in order to break generational cycles, you have to recognize generational patterns, right? And so my parents, thankfully, were very conscious about what they did, even within their own struggles, I would say. They try to balance handling their struggles without necessarily exposing them in front of their children who would not be able to handle it, right? While they were still trying to heal and work on themselves, while at the same time, not painting such of a perfect picture to where me and my brother think we're perfect and we won't have any challenges. And so I was fortunate enough to grow up in a family that tried to balance my parents still working on themselves, but understanding how their own issues can affect their children. So trying to heal themselves without exposing all their injuries in front of us, while still presenting enough of their challenges that can actually help us and learn how to grow. And so even in my adulthood now, with my children, I have that pattern now going on in my own family with my own children that kind of, makes that statement that I got to make sure I watch things that I've kind of learned that I don't even like about me necessarily, not exposing that too much to my children, where that becomes then a pattern for them or a cycle for them, right? So that's kind of what I can say just about that dynamic within my own family, that it was taught to me, at an early age that I understood my parents were very conscious. Now I'm a conscious parent of making sure that I recognize generationally what I'm passing down to make sure that if anything, I'm given a cycle of healing more than I'm given a cycle of injury.
Wonderful. That was very eloquent. Appreciate that explanation. And Wendy, could you also give us a little bit of insight into your upbringing and?
Hi, I grew up in a family of 8, and out of the 8 of us, 2 of my siblings decided they wanted to dabble over into using drugs and selling drugs, and come from a Christian home. My mom was a single mom. My dad died when I was 9, so she had to raise the 8 of us by herself. But just growing up in the city of Baltimore, Maryland, where drugs were plentiful, and my siblings that did decide to go to that direction, they found themselves in jail, in prison. And now they're doing great because they both are clean now, but that's just where they found themselves. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So one of the terms that, as we get more into this topic of diversity in, treatment and recovery, and some of the obstacles towards Black and brown people, either dealing with stigma and holding back on seeking out those services, or some of the barriers that may be faced, I want to talk a little bit about implicit bias to set the stage. And for those of you who may not know, that's basically implicit bias is a term to describe when we have attitudes towards people or associate, with them, associate certain behaviors with them without any kind of conscious knowledge. It's sort of this unconscious thing. So we see it a lot in, perhaps Hollywood or media, where a Korean person may be quiet or studious, or a Latino character may be sexy and fiery, or prone to anger, that kind of thing. This is a question, Wendy, I'll stick with you. How does implicit bias play a role in behavioral health treatment?
Well, it can be very disruptive in treatment, because if you it causes you, to not to be able to form good therapeutic relationships. It can cause you to be very judgmental when someone come in, because you already have in your mind why they're there and what they need, instead of listening to the person as an individual to see why they're there and what they need. It can cause you, when you're doing your treatment plans, you already in your mind think you know what they need. So you're writing up a treatment plan to help someone when you haven't had a discussion with a person to find out what they're needing. when you're reporting their treatment progress, that can play a part in that, because you're reporting that based off of what you think and what you believe, not what you're actually seeing take place. Also, when you it can cause people to leave treatment early, because when people feel like that they're not receiving what they need at a place, then they will leave because they feel like it's not effective. I'm here, you don't see me as a person, you see me as a group, or you see me as who you think I am. You haven't tried to figure out what I need to get the services that what I need. It has a our behavior, our behavior, I call this blind spots. So it's like we don't realize that we have this type of implicit bias. And I'm not going to say it's just African Americans who face this. I think it's all people, because we all have implicit bias about people in general and what we think that they are or who they are. And then we don't realize, and I call it blind spots, because we don't realize that it's there. It's playing in the back of our mind. It's stuff that we've learned growing up, or stuff that people have said that we didn't realize that we gleaned from that and took it with us. And so this is an example. A patient I had several years back reached out to me because every time he go to a treatment center, the people say that he likes to play on women. So before he gets there and they see his name, everybody who's getting ready to work on him already have that in the back of their mind, right? So they already had an implicit bias before he even walked in the door. So maybe when he was there last time, he really was trying to be manipulative and play on women, but that may not be his purpose now. Now he's coming because he's really ready to receive treatment. But because that's already been implanted into the staff, because it's been told by past staff or older staff, so he's not getting the treatment that he needs. So that can just disrupt his treatment. So he can never go to this facility to really truly get the treatment that he would need.
Okay, thank you. That's great. Danny, how about yourself? Same question. I can repeat it if you need me to.
No, I understand it. Thank you, Daniel. I think just to build off what Wendy said, I think is really, I think implicit bias plays a role in almost every aspect and facet of the help seeking process, right? So, and as Wendy discussed, that I don't think that this is something that we always consciously are aware of that we do. I think the danger of not recognizing that we all hold implicit bias and that we need to consistently work on that is that it does create treatment environments for people who are coming into the door, specifically Black and Brown people, and it does not give them an opportunity to have the full therapeutic experience that I think is sometimes automatically afforded to other groups of folks. And I think that that is what impacts Black and Brown people's ability to want to seek out support and to seek out services. When I was a part of substance use treatment, there definitely were different biases based off of counties and locations that people were coming from. And so if we had young men coming from our urban areas, then they were explicitly looked at as gang members who had criminal histories and criminal past, versus if we had young men coming from rural areas, they were seen as their drug behavior was probably due to boredom or just the culture of what was going on in small farming towns. Whereas young Black boys specifically were being criminalized based off of their drug usage. And so I think that when we are in the field, it's really important for all of us who have a hand in their treatment to really consider what our biases are so that we don't come to the table with those blind spots, so that we can adequately serve the clients that we see in front of us.
Thank you. That's great. I think that's getting to the crux of culturally informed counseling and treatment as well. And Interim Chief Scott, if that's the appropriate, proper title to use for the purposes of tonight, I want to ask you that same question from the perspective of law enforcement. So how would you describe implicit bias as a challenge to police work and or just, a challenge to policing offenders with substance use or mental health disorders? If you have any examples, that'd be great, but I'm just interested in your perspective on this topic as well.
Well, I'll do my best. I had not considered implicit bias in this specific of a application before. And I would say thank you to both Wendy and Danielle. Your explanations have already opened my mind to what maybe I wasn't even thinking of as perhaps a barrier there. Let me also say, you can call me Greg, that's fine. I don't get hung up on the title too much. So Greg works just fine. I don't see any other Gregs on the panel, so that would be more than acceptable. Implicit bias, as it specifically relates to the treatment or mental health or addictions, I'm learning from you in this because like I said, I hadn't really thought of it in that regard. When I think of law enforcement, what we really do is, a call for service comes in, and that can be someone that's struggling in a mental health crisis, or someone who's maybe operating a vehicle in an erratic manner, and we take the appropriate enforcement action. So it's really, that's something I haven't thought long and hard about, but I need to, and like I said, I really appreciate the ladies already opening my mind to that. I'm not sure how. I could see where it could be a possibility, in Danielle's example of certain persons, we may make it a judgment already that it's a dealer as opposed to someone who's caught in the cycle of using it. And that would be something that would have to, as Wendy said, that's something that we shouldn't come to that encounter with that preconceived notion of the person that we're dealing with. We should let the facts and what's going on around us really develop that and inform our course of action as much as possible. I mean, we are mandated to enforce the laws that are on the books as they are on, and sometimes we don't have discretion to take a whole lot of different avenues in that, but it could very much affect the interaction between law enforcement and the people with whom we need to work. I hope that answers your question as best as I can.
I think that's very honest and evolved answer. We're going to come back to similar topics in terms of law enforcement and how it interacts with, how either not so much prejudices, but, dealing with basically substance use disorder as a moral failing versus an illness. So we'll come back to you on some questions related to that in a little bit. Excuse me for the background noise. Door just slammed upstairs. Okay, so part of, in order to have these crucial conversations about racial equality, for our purposes tonight, it's in the context of treatment and recovery environment. But I think it's also important to be honest about language and not, walk on eggshells if we're going to have these honest discussions, and terminology seems to change over time. I myself will admit that when I was asked to moderate this tonight, that was kind of worried, something that worried me in the back of my head is, am I going to say the wrong thing? I don't mean to, and I just want to, I'll start with you, Ramon. What advice or guidance would you give to perhaps a white person or somebody watching this who isn't sure or worries about saying the wrong thing or using inappropriate terminology, not with no malicious intent, but when we're talking about race language and trying to remove barriers, to helping people get services they need, what kind of, sort of advice would you put out there?
Just be real. It's 2021. We don't really have to walk around on eggshells anymore. People can tell if you're genuine or if you're judging. A lot of the times, if somebody's genuinely coming up and asking, if I'm okay or, something like that, it's up to me to respond and not react. Because a lot of people are curious about what's going on with Black and brown people, because a lot of it's now being put on social media. So just stand in the gap. For me, that's the only way I can think about it. Stand in the gap. Because when you're operating out of that love of, trying to help out and reach, just be prepared to get somebody that's used to having somebody negative. Because a lot of the times, speaking from personal experience, I didn't always have good people trying to reach out. There were others that were trying to reach out to get info, to go gossip later. So it's just pick and choose, who you want to help. And it's not saying, Black person, I won't help, white person, I'll help, but just kind of get a feel for the environment, what's going on around that time. And don't be afraid. Again, that's the simplest way I can put it. Don't be afraid. Because again, if I'm in a struggle and I see somebody being genuine, I'm 9 times out of 10, I'm going to open up just a little bit to kind of see where that person's standing at and then just kind of go from there.
Okay, thank you. And Natasha, let's get you involved here. What kind of feedback or guidance might you offer us in terms of that same topic, that same question?
Sure. I agree with Ramon. I think that if you, as a white person going to a Black person with genuine questions or concerns or trying to learn about the culture or like you said, Dan, like what I can and what I can't say and why I can and can't say those things, I think that's one thing. But I think if it's something that isn't genuine or, you're being just insensitive, then that's a separate thing. So I think, everyone in any kind of relationships, you want that genuine connection. So if you're being genuine and you really want to learn to improve, your cultural awareness, then I think that's great. So I think that just being genuine and asking those questions to help you better yourself is a good thing.
Thank you. Excellent. Before we go into the next question, is there anybody else that would like to weigh in on that one real quick?
Daniel, I would like to weigh in on that.
Okay.
I think, it's a term that we use called cultural humility. And I think it's really important to walk into situations in humility and to sit in a seat of a learner. And I know that a lot of us show up as experts in our area, right, of our area of work and career. And, we paid a lot of money for our degrees or, whatever the case is, right? And so I think sometimes as a clinician, particularly, right, because when people come into treatment, they see people like me, that somehow we put this onus on ourselves to know everything, to be everything, and to present a certain way. And while absolutely we need to have our theoretical knowledges and we need to be oriented into, treatment interventions and all of those things. But I think it's also really important to lead discussions in absolute humility and to sit in the seat of the learner, to allow your client, to allow the person that is sitting in front of you to teach you some things that maybe you know or do not know, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think the honest is also to educate yourself about what it is. Our world is changing super fast. And so things that I learned in my program are a little bit different than what is going on now, but it's up to me to continuously educate myself, understand what is out there, so that I can accurately and more effectively work with the people that I serve. So I really appreciate this question because I do think that, there is some anxiety surrounding, well, what should I do? I don't want to say the wrong things. I don't want to offend anyone. And I think when you practice cultural humility, you go in with the sense of, I am seeking learning from you. I want you to tell me about your experience before I could tell you about your experience. I want you to take me along on your journey before I tell you what your journey has been for you. And once you build that trust, once you build that rapport, once you, I think, interact with your clients on that level, then I think that you all can deepen that helping relationship. So absolutely the genuineness, but I think it's important to to be a learner in that process and to continuously educate yourself.
Thank you, Danielle. That's great insight. I'm glad you chimed in on that one. Okay, let's move on here. Sort of shifting back to, I guess, the brass tacks of what we're talking about tonight. I'm just going to come out and ask you, Pastor Bennett, what are some of the primary barriers, generally speaking, that you view as an issue that prevents Black or brown people from seeking out or receiving treatment services?
All right, thank you. Yeah, so there's a number, of issues. I can kind of point out a few that I just, even in my own position as a pastor and counseling and dealing with people. One, I think, starts in the families, right? So, in a lot of Black homes, and not going to generalize because it's not every home, but in many homes, there is sometimes an overly extreme conversation that goes on in the home that requires everyone to keep what's going on in the home, right? And so, and then that, especially when those things are being said into children, and a lot of times it's being said from a standpoint of fear, like almost threatening, like, you better not say nothing when we go here. Or even if the child is going to a counseling session or something, you better not tell them this happened, or don't tell what goes on inside this house. And so some are just doing it inappropriately. Some parents may be doing it inappropriately, and some parents may be doing it out of just not a knowledge, because sometimes privacy is okay, right? I don't want my children they're in the home. So me and mom are doing adult things, and they're kids. I don't want them just going and telling everything. But at the same time, you have to teach us within our experience. We have to be able to talk and then talk about what's all right to talk about, right? And not have a fear that everyone is against us. And so we got to keep this and we cannot be afraid to get help. So I think, one, it has to begin in the home where we begin to nurture each other, right? Even in my church, I see that a lot of times, okay, the church is helping center, supposed to be, right? But a lot of people are fearful to even talk about what they're going through. So we in the African-American community have to provide that space that tells our African-American brothers and sisters that, one, it is okay to need help. And that's not a bad thing, because a lot of times we grew up in environments that taught us we need to just help ourselves. And so we grew up in an experience where we're not being helped, because there's some things we can't just help ourselves about. We actually need someone else to help. So that's one. But then two, kind of maybe picking back off a little bit what we were just talking about, I think language is important with our community. I think language is important. And so I remember talking about this one time in the sermon when we were dealing with mental health and different things like that, that some things is just about teaching knowledge. Like, so in our growing up, we didn't hear a lot about mental health. So now what happens is, when I start talking about mental health, people think I'm saying they're crazy, because they automatically connect mental health. Oh, you calling me crazy? I don't want to talk about this. So then you have to begin to break it down in the terms of, for example, most people won't have a problem with you saying, let's go work out. We need to get physically strong, right? Or, so you have, nobody has a problem. Oh, you're sick? We need to go to the doctor and make sure we're working on your natural health. See, but we generally don't hear that language that says, okay, let's deal with what's going on in the mind and your thoughts. That's called mental health. And then explaining to people, right? Not just bashing. I had to even learn this as a pastor, to not to treat everybody like they know what I believe I know. And sometimes we do that, and that kind of puts people in the frozen thing. Like, so sometimes you just have to come to where a person is and explain things like, no, we all have mental health, because we all have our minds, right? And we want to make sure that we're just nurturing the health. So I think a lot of this stuff really, to me, is about relationship, right? You want to help people, you got to become relational. People have to feel like you want to help them, right? And so once we make ourselves to the other person that we are trying to be relational with them, and bring that sense of comfort that we're literally trying to help them, and maybe even sometimes put our own experience in there, it'll begin to break down some of those barriers.
Thank you, Pastor. And Natasha, I know you need to jump off soon, so if we could tap into your insight and knowledge for this question as well. What are some of the main barriers from your perspective that prevent
Sure.
Black and Brown people from receiving services?
Okay. I think that there is a lot of like intergenerational just trust issues and mistrust with like just institutions. You know, you have things like the Tuskegee and things like that where Black people were misused, and so that there's this mistrust. Like we just don't trust the institutions that are set up to try to help people, but we don't trust it because in the past they weren't there to help us. There's a term called like a healthy cultural paranoia. And so we develop this just mistrust because we've not been helped. Like we've been put in situations where the people that were supposed to help us did not do those things. And then I think that just as a whole, the social service system, you don't see a lot of Black and Brown people when you go to those places. So you go and you want to work with someone that looks like you, someone that you feel that you might be able to connect to and maybe have a better understanding of you, and those faces aren't there. And so it's like, why should I try? Because I'm, it's just going to be like every other place where I've not been understood, I've been misunderstood. And so I'm not going to try.
Thank you, Natasha.
Mhm.
Appreciate your time. The next question is sort of a extension of the previous one, where we're going to talk about stigma and just, kind of a lead into this. I was watching a TV show, The Shield, actually rewatching it for the second time last week, and there was a scene where a Korean character talked about how, Korean men, to show emotions is a sign of weakness. And then, we see in a show like The Sopranos where, Tony's big secret is that he's seeking psychiatric help, and it's like literally a life or death thing to keep that secret because, it would be perceived as a mob leader or somebody at that level to be weak if they're getting psychiatric services. I know that's, fake fiction, Hollywood, but I do want to talk about some real life experiences. Ramon, what are some of the stigmas that you personally let's just say that you experience yourself in your community as you work through your own mental health and or substance use disorder?
One major thing was a man asking for help was weak. That's the main thing from, the community here. Whenever I went down south to New Orleans to visit family down there, just about anywhere that I went, if a man is asking for help, especially mentally, he's weak. So that was a major barrier that I had overcoming, just personally going through this process. I had to literally deprogram my mind from every man truth that I've known in order to get on that recovery process. Real men do show emotions, but controlled emotions. It was just certain things like that just blew my mind, the more I kept working on this process. But the main one, it was just men don't ask for help. We go to work, we come home, take care of whatever we need to, or you go party, whatever. But it was never a man takes care of his mental in order for him to, be able to do what he needs to do for his family. So it's just little things like that played a huge part in that recovery process.
Yeah, just the old toughen up, or put on your big boy pants, that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
How about you, Danielle? I know you may not have personal experience, as a person in recovery, but you certainly have plenty of experience observing or witnessing or talking to clientele about some of the stigmas they've faced. Would you be able to share some of the commonalities that you've observed over your time in the field?
Yeah, sure. First of all, I think Pastor Bennett and Ramon did an excellent job, I think, talking about our internal stigmas. So I really am going to focus my answer more on the systematic concerns of the issue. Black men specifically are labeled aggressive when they are exemplifying signs of depression. Because in depression, one of the symptoms of depression is irritability. They're misread as being aggressive. Black people are more likely to be misdiagnosed and given schizophrenia as a diagnosis because of other things, and sometimes related to religion and all of those things. And so I think that while there are stigmas that each culture holds internally, I think that all of them is kind of intertwined with how our system takes in Black and brown people, and how their interaction with the greater system impacts how they are seen. If we look at our drug war in the 80s, right? How under Reagan's administration, we were really going to go to war with drugs. That disproportionately sent Black men to prison for crack cocaine, and for, in the 90s and the early 2000s for marijuana. Now we have marijuana spas. Now we have, you can eat edibles, you could do all these kinds of things that Black people specifically were criminalized and demonized for. And so, I think that, yes, it's okay that we talk about what kind of in our own backyard, but I think it always broadens out to the greater systematic issues of racism, equality, and equity, and discrimination within our systems, and how when a person is seeking help, what the barriers are in front of them. And so if I'm going to go and tell people that I have a drug problem and I might be arrested for it, or I'm going to be criminalized for it, because most African Americans who are in treatment come through treatment because of the criminal justice system. They don't come through treatment because they were offered mental health or substance use treatment. Whereas other cultures or majority culture is oftentimes offered that path. And so I just wanted to highlight that because I think that creates the greater divide, and that creates the greater stigma that we have. If I can't trust that the system is not going to see me as a criminal, or that I might not come on drug charges because I confided in my primary care doctor that I used drugs and I didn't have to fear that they were going to take my child away, right? Or if I believed that I could have financial access to treatment and didn't think that I could lose my job to go into treatment. And then when I showed up at treatment, if I felt that I could get fair and equitable services, versus if I felt like I was going to be demonized for what I do, right? So now the opioid crisis, right? That is being treated very differently. All of a sudden we have mental health court, we have drug court. We are giving out is a Narcan so that we can revive people, right? That was not afforded to Black communities at all. And so the stigma really does come down to, am I going to be criminalized? Am I going to be demonized? Am I going to be given fairness and treated fairly? Can I afford the services when I get there? And I think that is the mistrust in the system that Natasha talked about.
Thank you, Danielle. That was amazing. Very eye-opening. Before we move on, I just want to open up Wendy or Greg. Is there anything that you would like to add on this particular topic? Okay. See, nobody wants to follow that act, Danielle.
Well, I think all three gave such great answers. It's really not much more to need to be added.
Yeah, I hear you. It's just that question is so much at the crux. I just wanted to at least offer it up. So we'll keep moving. Ramon, I wanted to cut something you mentioned there, and we've talked about this before, but you talked about this process or evolution of deprogramming and reprogramming yourself, in terms of maybe unlearning some of the stigma or influences in your environment and rewiring yourself to, realize that seeking treatment is an okay thing, that you are still a man if you ask for help. Can you talk a little bit about, how you dealt with that societal label that you maybe were soft for having a mental health disorder, and just what that reprogramming was like, how it came about? Was it a moment of clarity? Was there some particular event, somebody help you along the way?
For me, it kind of began, honestly, again, I had personal experience, but it's going to sound weird. But when I got locked up, honestly, that was my awakening moment. Hearing that jail cell kind of slam shut, that was a lock I'd never heard before. So that was something that kind of, again, it's weird, but it brought me peace, because for me and my faith, I had all distractions out of the way. There was no drugs, there was no alcohol. I could be angry, but I was in the cells. It's not much I can do. And there was a daily bread sitting on the desk. And that was the only thing in that room. So that kind of began that spiritual journey of deprogramming my human mind and kind of uploading, the spiritual part, understanding who I was and who I was created to be, and not these foolish ideas that I was, raised up, maybe culture had, was implanted and things like that. But leaning on faith was something that truly, to me, at sometimes that's all I had, because I was pretty much working on an empty tank, trying to master up all this macho man energy to fix something I had no idea to even begin with. So spiritually, just seeking out that help of, where do I just begin at today? What do I do today that's going to help me in my future? And that was one thing that I learned, one day at a time, one moment at a time. And that's something that pushed me along. My counselor, even in recovery process, she told me, you do the same thing day one as if it's day 100, because whatever worked on day one is going to be something that pulls you all the way through. And again, for me, was my faith. So that was something that and still to this day, I lean on, because it's an ongoing process. We never are fully complete or perfect, until the day we go on the ground. It's an ongoing process of always trying to be better than what I was the day before or even minutes before. So.
Excellent. That reminds me of when I was 11 months sober, I had to go to jail to pay for some transgressions before I went to treatment that last time. And as I walked in the cell, the top bunk to the right of me was empty, and there was a stack of books, and right there was a brand new copy of the Alcoholics Anonymous Big Book. It was like donated from Intergroup, looked like nobody had ever opened it, and I was like, I'm gonna keep that. And I hung on to it for the duration. And it was a sign to me from my higher power, and it was helpful. It helped me get through that experience, not just sober, but with dignity and grace intact. So I can relate a little bit to that experience. Thank you for sharing that. Wendy, you're a good person to ask this. What are 2 or 3 things, or just however, 1, 2, 3 things that you believe are most important to overcoming this issue of the still suffering Black or brown recovery from being reluctant to receive mental health or substance use disorder treatment?
2 or 3 things to overcoming it. I think what we're doing here right now, showing people where the lack of what people need is at. I think that's one thing. Another thing is, I think all of us learning and teaching and being willing to learn. And then as we learn, we teach other people and being willing to talk about it. Because I think sometimes we keep the door closed so much on what's going on that we're not willing to let people in to see what's going on. And so I think, like I said, this right here, just sharing, like the chief said, and I'm not sure if it's the right title, but Greg, as Greg said, he learned, within the first 5 minutes of the conversation, just by listening. So I think for everybody, just being willing to learn and then apply what they've learned. And I think for us to advocate, I think that's another thing. We need to advocate for this. We have 2 treatment centers here in town, and they're doing their due diligence to try to, help people with substance abuse. We have 1 mental health hospital here in town and doing their due diligence to try to help. But we need to just keep advocating for more and doing more. And, referrals, and all of us work at different agencies, all of us. And by us coming together, sharing what resources we have, and ROSC, they do a great job once a month that we get on a line, we talk, and we sharing our resources with each other. So, oh, Chestnut has this. Okay, we don't have that. We can send someone there. So I think that's something else that can help. Me and Danielle, we used to talk all the time before our program shut down, then open back up. But, you know, her students coming to us. So just being able to work together as a community. And I love it that Greg is here. That just blew my mind. I really love it because we need all entities to come together to move this forward. And I'm done.
Thank you. That's a good plug for the ROSC if ever I heard an opportunity, Angie. Pastor Bennett, same question to you. A couple of things that you think are most important. And if it's the same thing that Wendy just talked about, that's fine, but I'd like to hear your input on this question.
Yeah, I agree with much of what she said, or all of what she said, pretty much. Make it normal, right? Make these type of conversations normal, and with our respective community groups and different things that we come in contact with, we have to make it normal to seek help, make it normal to receive help when you know you need it. But also something that we can do, even especially in the structure of leadership, is to make sure that those, I think Wendy or Danielle, one of them, I heard them say advocacy, right? To advocate, right? So if we know that there are these biases within certain institutions that are set up to help, we need to make sure that we are advocating for people. That sometimes means going with them, right? Not just telling them, hey, you need to go, but actually saying, I'll go with you and get you started in the process. We can advocate by those of us who have been through the process ourselves, giving our own what we call a testimony, right? Or our own real life experience, because some people just need to sometimes see that someone has went through the same process that they're telling someone else to go through, right? I'll even just give an example for me with the whole vaccine thing. I was trying to get people to take it, and they was like, nope, we're gonna have to see you take it first. You take it first. And I took the next day, I know all the people that told me they wasn't taking it was like, yeah, I went and got mine too, because you got yours. So I just think part of that advocacy is those who have been through the experience, not understanding that, yeah, your journey and your victory, while it is so tremendous and great for you, it's even bigger than that, because your experience in pulling through is going to help so many more people, right? That just haven't made it to that point of strength yet to even seek help, but then making sure that within those respective institutions and treatment centers that are set up for that, that we're advocating to make sure that they are giving, right, the treatment that is needed to our community. So I would just say, make it normal as much as possible within our selective group, that this is a normal thing. This isn't a strange thing. If you need help, that's normal. If you need to talk, that's normal. If you need treatment, that's normal. Counseling, like in the church perspective, we've been fighting hard within our own, congregation to make sure that the congregants understand, yes, we believe in prayer. Yes, we believe in faith, but God also created the physician. God also created, if we're going to say he created everything, he also created the medicine, right? Or gave the ability for the physicians in the medical field to create the medicine. He also gave the mind to the counselor. So we cannot forsake these things just because we're saying prayer. No, pray and get help, right? And sometimes God helps you through these means. So those are some of the things I'll add on.
That's great. If you do it enough, the uncomfortable becomes comfortable. And I like how you talked about sometimes that window of willingness where somebody is willing to get the help is short, and just to capture them in that moment and actually advocate, right then and there, or help them get there to a treatment center, whatever it might be, is very important, because the next day their attitude may be, 180-degree difference. And what you talked about in recovery circles is, very similar with 12-step literature, where, yes, when the spiritual malady is overcome, we straighten out mentally and physically. However, page 133 of the book talks about, same thing you just said, God's put great, medical practitioners on this planet and we should use them. It's not, this business of other people in recovery playing doctor on what people should or shouldn't, do medically is it's dangerous. Anyway, enough of my little soapbox there. So we'll move on. Part of what we're doing, is striving to empower citizens to reach out and ask for help. That's exactly what y'all were just talking about. Ramon, can you share a little more about, maybe the specifics of how did you actually come to seek services or what that experience looked like? I know you've talked about it. I'm just interested in like what actually happened. Was it a moment of clarity and that, just the specifics of you finally saying, yes, I need help, and then, where you went, how it went down, that kind of thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah. You guys knew my mom, should tell you I'm stubborn. So it took me a while to kind of grab a hold of what was going on. I mean, I would go to class and, I wouldn't be disrespectful or anything, but I would go to my, services that I had to go to. But it wasn't until I want to say about a month and a half in, I just prayed, God, open up my ears, my heart, my mind, my soul, open up to whatever I need to get today. I'm tired of coming in here, having this stink attitude, and it feels like I'm passing it on to everybody in here. So just open up my ears for me to get a message. And it wasn't until I heard a young man speak a certain way about his son's mom that kind of just, it shook my world. It was just like, whoa, like this is what's actually going on, and I'm looking around the room and it's guys just like me, different colored, different type of hair, different lifestyle. Some guys worked nonstop, some guys didn't work. But it was just, if I'm here and we're all here for the same thing, why can't we just focus on what we need to do so we can stop complaining and coming back? And that was one thing that kind of triggered off in my mind. If I'm complaining about something, why not work towards that instead of just complaining and not doing anything? So that's what kind of kickstarted everything. It was about a month and a half of realizing, I can either repeat the cycle all over again and come back 2 years and see the same judge, see the same people in this room, see the same counselors, or I can make this my first time and my last time and actually apply everything that I'm taking from here. Because believe it or not, I didn't know everything. And it took a long time for me to discover that. But I tell clients now, even that I work with, that I've been through this process. And gladly, I would go through it all over again. Because you can learn something new. It's like, I had a pastor tell me, you can read the same scripture, but you'll get something new every time you read it. And that's what I tell clients, you might be going to this DB class, it's the same way I felt, but it's something new every day. It's not saying that you're an angry person and you're just breaking everything and doing whatever you want. It's showing you different tools to turn that anger to something positive. I tell people now I'm fine being angry because it's a lot of energy that I can actually take that, convert it, and I can be more organized, being, having all that anger in the back burner. Being upset is something, again, that can help you be more punctual, being on time. Something that I love doing is the gym. That's something that also aided with, the mental, changing. So it's just take a lot of everything. Don't just put your A's all in one basket saying, I'm just going to attend this class and this should fix everything. Take notes. That's something that I did in every class. I still do to this day. You guys might see me in meetings with my pen and notepad, but that's just something for me that helps me apply everything that I'm either learning, need to learn, or I need to teach.
Thank you. Appreciate you sharing that. And Danielle, maybe more from a clinical perspective, in your experience seeing, people reach out to get help. Are there any insights or experiences that you might offer up as a professional, to help somebody kind of make that step, from contemplation to action?
Yeah. I think maybe what I gift people is to help them understand that it's a process. I think sometimes when we start things, whether it's the diet or anything else, right? Like we think it causes immediate change for us. And I think that sometimes people struggle with the process. because it's difficult. It's really difficult, right? Like part of sometimes using substances is to numb yourself and to avoid some of the pain and the hardships and the heartbreaks that you have experienced along the way and some of the traumas. And so seeking help often includes uncovering some of that, bringing it back into your conscious and into your awareness, learning how to not shut your emotions off, learning how to sit in those, recognizing that I might feel happy, but I also might feel really sad. And so I think Pastor Ben and Ramon did a great job of talking about normalizing some things. I normalized what the process looks like. I normalized that it will be difficult. I normalized that there might be times where they might want to give up. But part of what I talk about is that installation of hope. And how can they get from day to day with utilizing hope and small movements, right? Like Ramon, kind of what you talked about, like build upon your recovery. Don't try to take it all in at once. And so, yeah, I really share with my clients that it's okay to get frustrated. But I also talk to them about how to build safety in that process and how to build support. Because some of the traumas that they uncover and have to bring back into their awareness can cause them to relapse. So, you know, I start clients off with talking about who are your supports and how are you going to be able to create safety around you so that in the moments where you want to break and in the moments where you can't hold yourself up, who can you lean on to do that for you?
Thank you very much. That was wonderful. Okay, some great stuff going. I'm seeing some great questions in the chat. See a good one from Bob Carty. Not surprising that he's got a good question, a couple others. So I'm gonna maybe try and do some lightning round here because the questions I have left would easily take us to 8. So I'm gonna have to skip a couple and we'll just kind of go another 10 minutes and see where we're at there. Greg, let's appreciate your patience. I've got a couple in a row for you here. Earlier we were kind of talking about, Danielle was making some great points about how, the war on drugs during the 80s and, crack abusers were, very much criminalized versus today's opioid epidemic. It seems like there's more of a, awareness that it's treated as an illness, or rather than a crime. So we're hearing more instances lately of offenders being offered treatment, either on the spot of an arrest or shortly after booking, as an alternative to, actually being arrested for a drug-related offense. This definitely seems like a positive progressive step in terms of law enforcement recognizing addiction as an illness. And illegal usage oftentimes is, the symptom of that disease. That said, what might you say to somebody who's concerned about a lack of equity in this policing approach? In other words, addiction might be treated as a disease for certain people, but as a crime or moral failing for others.
That's a more complicated question, at least in my mind, and that's not to diminish anything that Danielle said. I don't necessarily disagree with her on any of it. I think the big difference is the opioid was often a prescribed medicine that then became an addiction, whereas crack cocaine was not that. And so that may be some of the reason why it's been treated differently. I'm not sure of that at all, but I don't know. The Narcan has been a fantastic tool for us. We've used it. I can't even tell you how many times we've used it in all different kinds of situations. It's come to certain times where we go into a home or we come across a person and we're not certain if they've had an opioid or some other illegal drug that acts like an opioid. And then administered Narcan, and that's been resolved. And the thing with the Narcan then is that we don't make an immediate arrest, even if there's I think heroin is another one that Narcan will work on, because they go right with rescue. Once we've delivered Narcan, usually rescues on the way, if not following us right in the door, and those folks are going with rescue, and a lot of times those charges are then referred. It's a tough question. My heart goes out to people who are in those addictive behaviors, because I've seen people that are in the midst of the addictive behavior, and then you see them another couple days later, and it's a different person. They're a different person, and I've got to believe that the different person is the person that they really would prefer to be, as opposed to the person that's in the addictive state. But in a lot of regard, law enforcement hands are tied. If it's a criminal offense, we don't necessarily have the option to look to something else. Now, I think you may be referring to the safe passages effort that was started, and I think Danielle touched on this a little bit, maybe not intentionally, but there's distrust of the police, and we've got a lot of work to do in that regard to earn trust. It's not something that can just be given. We have to earn it. But I don't think most people are going to come to the police and say, look, I've got this problem. Can you get me into the Safe Passages program? And we would do that. I mean, that's our policy. That's what we have published in our SOPs. That's what we do. If someone were to come to us and say, I have this problem, here are my drugs, here are my paraphernalia, we would dispose of that. We would get them set up in the safe passages within the confines of how that system is set up. There's some certain parameters that we have to follow, but that's not typically how people view us. That's not how people react with the police, is to have that level of trust to come to the police. I would think a person that would come to the police at that particular moment would have to be at absolute rock bottom with no other possibility or opportunity before them that they would come to us. And that's too late. And that's really something that we in law enforcement need to work on, to build trust into the community so that they know that if they have these issues, we'll do what we can to help. And that's really where we're at with it.
That's great. And that, kind of answers my next question I had for you, which is basically, as an interim chief, or just, the police department in general, any changes that you would like to see to help implement, or changes maybe that are happening that, can sort of facilitate, people in the active stage of a disease to, seek help, rather than kind of that revolving door of, in and out of county jail for, various, drug violations, that kind of thing.
Sure.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh, that's okay. I think the community in Bloomington Normal has done a great job with a lot of the things they've done. Chestnut, Broman, one of the things that we've found very helpful recently is the McLean County Triage Center, where when we find someone in a mental health crisis, maybe they don't rise to the level of going to the hospital, but they need some place to go where they can relax and have someone maybe talk to them, or just someplace safe that they can go sit and do their own process. And the Triage Center has been very helpful in giving us another tool to use. Crisis is another partner that's really come alongside with us in that if we come across someone who's in a crisis, we can call them and they'll call us back within minutes and give us some advice or help. If it's a situation that is really important, I don't want to say important, that's not the right word. If it's a situation that dictates it, oftentimes they will come to where we are and help us work through that. I would like to continue our crisis negotiation training, our crisis intervention training. That's kind of hit a pause, but not because of us, because of the state funding for it has kind of waned of recent. You know, we have about 65% of our officers that have gone through that training. I would really love to see it 100%. Some of that may change with the new House bill, but we'd really like to get to that point. And something that's kind of a corollary, and I've found this conversation just fascinating. And you know, I would, one of the things that I think is going to be helpful, and I don't know how we would actually measure this, is that officer mental health has really come to the forefront recently within the past maybe year or so. We've recently started our own officer wellness program, and we have peer support groups, so that we've actually had officers who have been going into or were in crisis, who've reached out and have used those supports. And Ramon, when I hear you talking about the manly part, there's nobody more stuck in that framework than officers. You know, that you talk about not being able to show what is perceived to be a weakness. That's officers. So where I see this coming together in this context is that as officers become more aware of their own mental health needs and what those things look like, that gives us a better perspective towards the community, that we can start to recognize some of those things more readily and more quickly and have more compassion in those situations than we may have, you know, a year and a half or 2 years ago.
Thank you, Greg. That's just a lot of great information there, and it's just very encouraging to see your open-mindedness towards, you know, all this entire situation that we're talking about here. Definitely, everyone's better off when the police and the community are working in tandem, for sure. Okay, so I'm gonna have to drop a few questions here, but there's a couple that I do want to hit. Now, this is one that I would love to be asked sometime, but I will ask Ramon. I'll start with you. What would you tell somebody who just isn't sure that the work or the struggle required for a life in continued recovery is worth it?
I don't know who said it. I think it was Wendy or Danielle, but it's a process. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. It's not something that's going to happen within a year. Especially if you're looking at breaking a lot of family cycles. You have to do a lot of research into your family history, knowing what grandma and grandpa did, what great-great-grandma and great-great-grandpa did, because a lot of that stuff gets passed down. Generational curses. I didn't believe in that. I did more research, and lo and behold, it's a real thing. So just family history, honestly. Learn more of your family history, learn more of where people might have struggled at. And also remember back in the 80s and earlier, they didn't have all the help that we have now. I mean, you can literally have any type of help that you need off your phone. You can see a therapist over the phone, Zoom call like we're doing now. Don't expect changes overnight. You know, it takes 10,000 hours to master your craft. That's one thing I tell myself every day. So especially when it comes to making changes for yourself, be patient with yourself. Love yourself throughout this process, because it's going to be hard to find that. And if you can't love yourself throughout this process, you're going to have a hard time, you know, working through those tough days. And the way for me that kind of helped me pull through was, you know, in the end, I'm fighting to be the father that I want my son to be. So there's just certain things that, you know, everybody's situation is different, but there's always motivation in that mess that we always, you know, we want to complain about and trade somebody else. But just be grateful for what you have.
Thank you. Great advice. How about you, Pastor Bennett? What would you tell somebody who's on the fence about whether making all these changes and putting in all this work to heal is worth it?
Yeah, that's just it. The key words, it's worth it, right? It's worth it for you, yourself, right? It's worth it for you, but it's also worth it for you and those of you who have children. And it's worth it for your grandchildren if you got them, or the grandchildren that you may have in the future. It's worth it for the friends around you, right? It's worth it for your community and people that are looking up to you and looking at you. And so, but ultimately for you, your healing is worth it. And as Ramon was saying, instantaneous healing or immediate healing is generally always what is desired. But healing truly is a process, right? And the victory that you're going to have on the other side of that process is going to prove to you that it's worth it, right? And so you're going to hit bumps in the road that's going to make you fatigued, frustrated. Even in the healing process, you might pick the scab and it may start to bleed again, right? In a natural sense, or you may fall, or you may fail, have what you may perceive to be a failure, but don't stop the process, because healing takes time. And even within healing is the process of gaining new habits, right? And learning how to do, right? Or how not to do something you've been doing for a long time. And so it is definitely going to be worth it for you to do it. But sometimes you'll never know the value and the power of your journey of healing until you go through the process, right? And so I would just encourage somebody that you need to tell yourself, you need to look in the mirror and always wake up and remind yourself you're worth it.
Thank you. There's something just real quick sidebar related to that. A lot of times we'll hear in treatment or advise clients, just make a short list of what you want from recovery, what your life will be like in a year. And I've yet to meet anybody who's, gotten to that point and didn't shortchange themselves, just as far as the bountiful rewards that recovery does bring when we put the work in, not just kind of half measures or 1 foot in, 1 foot out. So 2 more quick questions. Let's go, Danielle. From experiences you have in the professional field, maybe what you've just heard about through clients or loved ones, what can you say about, that's either believed or assumed among Black and Brown people as far as what their experiences will be like assimilating into the local recovery community, or I guess what I'm saying is the perceptions of what that might be like, or what you've heard it actually has been like in terms of being accepted into the local recovery community. Is there maybe trepidation about that it would be difficult to get involved in that community? And are those concerns founded, or are they generally just like many things, mostly just in our mind? Does that make sense? I'm not sure. Okay.
Oh, it makes sense. I think it's predicated on location. So I'm originally from the South Side of Chicago, where for Black and Brown people, there may be access within their neighborhoods to be able to have recovery community with people who look like them. When I worked in substance use treatment in this community, at times it was really difficult to talk with Black and Brown people about connecting to the local NAAA, Celebrate Recovery, or whatever their recovery community was, because they didn't know if it was a space and a place for them. And mainly because I think, there's just, we talked about this already, the intergenerational and historical trauma that often accompanies specifically Black folks. And sometimes they don't know if there's space for them to share some of that, if they would be received with welcome, or if they would feel ostracized in some of those meetings. They know that they can talk about, they're drinking and drugging, but can they be real about some of their experiences, more nuanced? And so, I think we have a rich community in our area. And sometimes it's about helping them learn how to navigate that, finding them resources that they will feel comfortable with. But I do think that in our area, when it comes to Black and Brown people, it's, can I trust that community to be able to authentically bring myself into that community? And I think that is their biggest obstacle. And sometimes they find safety and sometimes they don't. And so I think Pastor Bennett in our community has been doing a really good job because, you know, we typically do church. And so, you know, we go to God as our spiritual guidance. We go to church and our pastors as our spiritual guidance. So I also think the efforts that he has led in the community to say you can have God and Jesus as well as, right, medication or therapy has also helped to shape that. But I also have seen churches as well create their own groups of recovery communities so that people can feel safe in a sense of belonging. So I think the barrier is that sometimes people don't always feel a sense of belonging and they can bring their whole selves into a space. And so I'm happy to see that churches are following suit, and Black churches in particular, to be able to be a safe place for folks who don't feel like they can find that community.
Thank you very much. Okay, last question. Wendy, how can, we've talked a lot about making a difference, as far as whether you're involved in law enforcement, professional in the field, living a recovery lifestyle day in, day out. How can the average person watching this help make a difference?
Okay. So we're short on time, so I'm not going to make my answer long, but
Okay.
I think I think that we need to, as I stated before, watch our blind spots to make sure that we are not being biased. That's number one. Number two, know what the resources are in our community. So when we come across people who have these different things going on, we can help refer them. Make it, as Pastor Bennett said, make it normal for them, to go seek help, talk to them, be there for them, help guide them. And then even within ourselves, everyone, watch what we say and how we say it and the words we use, because we may not realize that we're affecting people that surround us by what we're saying, but we do. I mean, when we say, girl, you have cuckoo puffs, or I'm trying to think of saying that people say, or you nuts, or anything like that, realizing that just that little candid talk like that we don't think is affecting anyone around us, but we're putting a negative connotation on mental health. Or we be like, oh, he just a junkie. That's putting a negative connotation on substance abuse. So we need to really, just as everyday people, watch our language, search ourselves to see what's going on within us, what our biases are. We need to make sure that we know the resources in the community. We need to make sure that we are showing humility, like Danielle said. So a lot of the things has already been said in this conversation, what needs to be done. We just need to act on it, not just talk about it, but act on it. So that's the biggest thing, I think.
Yeah, thank you. That's great. Yeah, Ramon.
One thing I'll kind of add, Pastor Bennett and Wendy kind of talked about it, but self-talk, how do you talk to yourself? Don't, if you go and get a court case, a legal case, don't go off of those labels that you get in that legal system. Because I'm guilty of doing that. I went with the unfit parent, all this, anger issues, and I fed into that. And all that did was prolong my recovery. Just know that if you get in that situation, start giving yourself healthy talks. If you got to do it in the morning in the mirror, write Post-it notes. I'm a big fan of Post-it notes. I'll put them everywhere, all over my desk. Even for men, especially for men, write yourself some positive messages on those Post-it notes. If you got to write one big one on the mirror, do that to get your mindset, kickstarted to those changes that are going to be happening. Just plan ahead.
Thank you. That, both you're saying reminds me of the slogan, people seeking recovery or still suffering, with substance use or mental health disorders. We're not bad people trying to be good. We're sick people trying to get well. That's, I know some of you have heard that probably 100 times, but maybe one of you hasn't. And I think that summarizes the issue pretty well. Okay, well, thank you. Those are the prepared questions. I know I said we'd have about 20 minutes for Q&A from our audience. Maybe some people can stay a little bit late. I know I have no problem doing that, but I guess if it's up to each person's discretion. But Angie, I'm going to turn it over to you for any questions we have from the attendees.
Excellent. Thank you, Dan. And thank you, everyone, all the panelists for all of the invigorating discussion, a lot of awareness. There's a lot to digest, and I'm going to marinate over a lot of the information that was shared tonight. I have a couple of questions I would like to pitch to. The first one I'll send over to you, Danielle, if you don't mind. Can you speak to issues specific to race that may affect mental health, such as colorism, physical appearance, esteem, and discrimination? How do counselors of all races counsel to recover from a world that bombards a person with daily images and experiences of being less than based on a race?
Okay, I think I'm gonna try to understand the question. I think the question is asking, how do counselors essentially address race?
I think it's from the subliminal messaging that we're bombarded with, either, no matter what your ethnicity being, but you're receiving all these messages, social media, movies, as Dan alluded to, and even conversations. How do you counsel the different individuals coming to you and presenting conditions with also these different layers that may be affecting their mental health?
Yeah, so I think the term is intersectionality, right? And nuances, right? Like people come in and they're not monolithic. It's not just one maybe thing. I think it's really important that we look at the whole person and we treat the whole person. We're not just, that's, the thought about, not just treating what's in front of you. So if someone came into substance use treatment, but they had a mental health disorder, right? Like you would treat the co-occurring. I think when we talk about though, the nuances of someone's culture and someone's race and that intersectionality, right? And how that impacts them, I lead with bringing culture into the treatment process. I don't leave that at the door. Right? That's a part of identity. And so I treat all of my clients' identities. And so for me, I don't separate that out. If I have a client come in, I ask them, how do they identify? What do they value? And how can we bring all of that into the therapy setting with them? We talk about, and even for my, white clients, Hispanic clients of all cultural backgrounds, we talk about the implications of their culture on things that they are experiencing. What it is, some of the stigmas that you have. What are some of the stereotypes that you heard about yourself? How does that impact your recovery? How does that impact your healing process? And so I think sometimes, especially, since the pandemic, I would say before then, but since the pandemic, we have, last summer, I think people would say was very racially charged, right? Like people have explained it that we're living kind of in two pandemics. You have COVID, and then you also have, you have the social, political, and racial unrest, right? And so I think it's time out to pretend like we don't see it. So I bring all of that into the space. And I ask, hey, is it okay if I bring this into this? And I let the client decide on what parts of themselves do they want to bring into it, but I give space for all of who they are. I hope I'm answering that. I didn't have the question in front of me, so I don't know if I really understand that correctly, but I think that is how I would approach it.
I think you answered that very eloquently, and you really honed in on, we need to ask each other, no matter where we're coming from, we need to sit down and get to know the person, who they are, what they're coming to see us with checking everything else at the door, all the stigma, all the stereotyps, all the implicit bias. But like you said, just ask. It's, it comes down to the superhuman nature, just connecting and asking. Thank you. You did that. Thank you. And then Wendy, one more question. Wisdom involving educating youth that have fully taken on their parents' cycles of destruction for self and others. What is some wisdom, and anyone else can pipe in, this will be the last question. Any kind of wisdom involving educating youth that have fully taken on their parents' cycles of destruction for their self and for others?
That's a good question for Pastor Bennett, but I will try. Well, to go back to where Danielle was, just meet them where they're at, see what's going on with them and how they are interpreting what their patterns are, and see how they see it, because you have to be very careful when you navigating in counseling and you have one where you think like, I'm looking at this saying, oh, that's totally just messed up, and they see it as something great. So you have to meet with them and just see where they're coming from with it, and then navigate, and then show them different ways. But you can't say what you're doing is necessarily wrong. You try to lead them to that belief, but you don't come out and say that to them, because they may reject it because it's all that they've ever known. So you just show them different ways and lead them up there. But like I said, I think that's a better question for Pastor Bennett.
Right over to you, Pastor Bennett.
Okay, pass me the ball. Let me try to get a layup here. Okay. All right. So no, I agree with her. With especially when you're dealing with youth who may still be in the home, you know, with their parents and different things. You do have to be careful about the language you use, because maybe there are some things going on that shouldn't be, but with that child or that youth still in that environment, you have to be careful about the language. But I think the important thing is somehow disconnecting the youth when the question says repeating all those bad patterns, right? That disconnecting the youth from the mindset that everything that you see someone else doing, you don't have to do, right? And especially in this stage of development, helping them to find their identity, right? By asking them, what do you want beyond what you experience, right? So beginning to detach the patterns and experiences that they are repeating in that cycle by framing, getting their mind to begin to frame a new future, right? They're in the present now. So how do we get them to a new future? Well, they have to, if I'm in a pattern and I'm experiencing something that's a cycle, the only way I can begin to break myself free from that is if I see something different. Now, if I begin to see something and think something different, I can begin to attach to that thing or do the works that will lead me to that, right? So I have to begin, we have to help our youth, even now today, just where our youth is at, we have to begin to help our youth to see something better, right? To see something different, you know, than maybe those cycles that they're in right now, or things that they've seen and experienced maybe with parents or relatives that are older than them, and generational cycles that are passed down. I've kind of found as a pastor dealing with youth, we don't always have to tell them. They have it in them. And we just have to learn how to pull the greatness out of them, cause them to see their greatness, and teach them that they then don't have to attach to someone else's mistake, but they can begin to see their own greatness even through someone else's mistake, like how you can even be greater than this. And I'll end with this. My father did that, right? My father was raised in Harlem. He was a heroin addict, right? He was involved in gangs. According to his own testimony to me, like his life was just messed up, right? And one day he had to get it right. And he said, I don't want to have children in this condition because I don't want these patterns to fall on them, right? So he began to get it together. But what he helped me to see is, like, when he tells me his story, it wasn't, hey, what do you want, right? Not just don't do what I didn't do. What do you want for your future? And he helped me to understand how to, because everyone that sees me, they were like, you look just like your dad and you do things that remind me of your dad, right? But the good thing is that's just physically. Inwardly, I'm totally different because I don't have to experience the things he's experienced, because he taught me how to see something that he wasn't able to see when he was a child. Things that he experienced as a child that kind of led him astray in his youth. He taught me how am I to see something different, to see better, to see greater, and then attach myself to it. So I think, like Wendy said, we have to find ways to talk to the youth and be expressive to them, but ultimately cause them to see the greatness in them and to begin to break down those maybe bad cycles or patterns and begin to build new great ones.
Wow, what an excellent way to bring that all full circle. Yes, thank you. And I want to take this moment to say, really to accentuate that self-awareness, the message of self-awareness. And overarching, that was the theme of this evening, just to bring some not only personal self-awareness, but awareness to our fellow community members in McLean County. So if you'd like to hear this recording from all the excellent panelists, thank you, Danielle. Thank you, Wendy. Thank you, Pastor Bennett. Thank you, Ramon. Thank you, Greg. And thank you, Dan, for moderating this discussion. Please like please like and subscribe to our ROSC YouTube, McLean County ROSC YouTube page. We will upload this recording. And you know what, I have a feeling this is just the start of this conversation. This can go in so many great directions. Thank you for all of us coming together. Greg, thank you for your expertise and also your background. Again, Wendy, Danielle, Pastor Bennett, Ramon, all of your expertise and background has brought so much awareness to even my own thought processes, some of my own microaggressions and implicit bias I didn't even realize. So thank you again for this conversation. And until next time, this is obviously part 1. Stay tuned for part 2.
Thank you, Angie. Take care,
Have a great
everybody.
evening,
Great
everyone.
job.
Thank you.